And they presented unto him gifts of gold, common sense, and fur. Or, have you seen this one? Can I see that slide, Graham? You seen this one? This is a classic. It's Frankenstein, gold Frankenstein, and no? Okay. How about this? This has been going around lately. Have you seen this one? What's that? There we go. Yeah, it turns out the women were wiser and they brought appropriate things. The thing is, all of us, sure all of us have, can I see the next one, Graham? We've all been to like a Christmas pageant or a play where, little guys have come out and they've said, perfectly gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Or they've been a little bit more creative in how they tell the story. And the thing is, the gifts are pretty much the most important part of the story. There are also two of the three reasons why we tell the story the way we do. It depends on your perspective as to whether or not we tell it incorrectly or it's tradition, right? But the way we tell the story, actually, let me cover the one thing that isn't connected to the gifts. The way we tell the story, we put the Magi in the stable with the baby Jesus. And that's not how Matthew tells the story. Matthew says they followed the star to the house where they found the child. In fact, the story goes on after that to say that Herod, the wise Magi having gone another way, decided to kill all of the children 2 years and younger. 2 years. Not infants, but 2 years and younger. So, it's reasonable to assume that the Magi, having come from a far-off distance, and only having traveled because they saw the star, it took them a while to get there, so they could not possibly have arrived on Christmas night. Although there is an interpretation of the story that says, in fact, the Magi, being so wise, knew where they were supposed to go generally, they just didn't know the specific location. So, in fact, they were already in Jerusalem talking to Herod when the star appeared. And then they followed it to Bethlehem. Conveniently, the star pointed right at Jesus. So, of course, they could be there. It depends on how you tell the story, doesn't it? But the other two things, that the Magi were kings, and there was 3 of them, depend exclusively on the gifts. Because they brought gold, frankincense, and myrrh, expensive things, they must have been rich. Therefore, they were kings. Except it doesn't say that. It also says Magi came from the east. It doesn't say 3. So there could have been a crowd. It could have been like a Magi co-op, and they got together, and like 5 of them came up with the gold, and 6 came up with frankincense, and myrrh's pretty expensive, 12 for that. It could have been a crowd. It wasn't necessarily 3. So what? Right? Really. That's what you want to say, isn't it? So what? And so what? This is nice. I talked about this on Christmas Eve, that we put them all in the same place. You put the rich and powerful in the same place as the shepherds. Everyone is welcomed by Jesus. Does it really matter? Okay, except it does a little bit, because they have their own story. That's why we have Epiphany. And the key point of their story is why they brought those 3 gifts in the first place. It's because they expected something in particular, and then it was revealed to them that it was not what was expected. Epiphany. That's why we call it Epiphany. It's the revealing. And the revelation is that they came seeking a mighty and powerful king. That's why they went to talk to Herod. We're looking for the king of the Jews. Oh, so you're the king of the Jews. Awkward. They're looking for a powerful and mighty king. And where do they end up? They end up in a stable. But see, this is why they brought those three gifts in the first place. As wonderful as, say, a wonderful children's story about how there was more than three magi and they brought other gifts as well, might be, they brought gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Why? Well, gold, riches, as somebody very wisely said a little while ago, they brought riches. Gold recognizes the king. Kings are wealthy. Kings are honored by gifts of gold. Frankincense is the incense that you would burn in the temple or in the synagogue. It recognizes the divinity, the power of God. Myrrh is a spice that you would anoint the dead with. It recognizes the mortality or even the anticipation of the sacrifice. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Those three gifts came for a very specific reason that had nothing to do with who brought them. They had everything to do with who they were for. The Magi came expecting to find a king. That was a prophecy. I have no doubt that they were a little bit confused by having to go to a stable or a house, a dwelling of any kind that was not a palace, to meet some poor people and a baby. And yet, they knew they were in the right place. They were smart enough to read the prophecy. They were smart enough to follow the star. But wisdom came with understanding they were in the right place. And that the gold, the frankincense, and the myrrh were still the most appropriate gifts. It wasn't exactly the king they expected, but it was nonetheless the king that was promised. So the story ends with the Magi, again, being smart enough to realize that it was not a good idea to go and talk to Herod. Okay, they had a little help with that. It says an angel told them to go back another way. But still, they went home another way. And we never hear from them again in the biblical story. Where'd they go? Well, they went home, is what they did. Which I'm guessing is where we're all going after church today. Probably, if not right away, certainly eventually. The point is that they went home, but their lives were changed. Just as your experience of worship this morning will change your life. Why are you laughing? What is it? Who laughed? What was that? It's not worship isn't a life-changing experience? Awkward now, isn't it? Yeah. The thing is, no, actually, every experience is life-changing in its own way, right? In its own way, every moment is life-changing because it's a new moment. Did the Magi go, okay, we're done here, let's go home and go back to their ordinary lives? Or did it change, the experience change them? Did they go back to doing just what they were doing before? Or did the experience of knowing? In fact, I like to think, actually, that it didn't just change them. I think they actually kind of kept an eye out for Jesus later on. You know, they were watching Jesus on the news, you know, reading in the paper. Oh, look what Jesus is doing today. Yep, we were right all along, see? And they, too, learned to live the way Jesus teaches, with love and grace and care, and compassion, understanding, love. I don't think for a minute they regretted the gifts that they brought, because they brought the gifts that were appropriate for the king that was promised. Gold recognizes the king, frankincense, the divine, and myrrh, the mortal. So what have you brought today? We have, as part of our worship, here in Ponoka, we pass a collection plate. We call it the offering. In Bashaw, they have a box in the lobby. The idea, of course, is that we encourage, and the church does, as an institution, every church does, that you offer gifts to support the work of the church. There's actually different ways that you can support the work of the church, too, by the way, with that gift, which is mission and service, right? Or gifts to your local congregation that do the work of your local congregation. Fundraising campaigns that support specific projects. There's all sorts of different ways that you can do that. And all of that is all about money. The thing we don't like to talk about in church, but often need to. But once you've done that, and you go away, what then? Is the gifting part done? See, just like the gifts that the Magi brought, the gift of Christmas isn't just for one day, is it? The gift of Christmas is for every day, because it's a gift of love. It doesn't ask anything. The Magi didn't say, here's our gifts, can you validate our parking? We're leaving now. They didn't ask what they get out of it. They simply acknowledged the fulfillment of the prophecy with their gifts. See, we all have gifts. We all have gifts to share. What gifts would you bring? That joke about the meme about the three wiser women who brought casserole, diapers, and something else, I forget what now. But they brought practical gifts that people need when they have a baby. It's not really funny, because it's true, right? The point is that we bring gifts that are appropriate, and yet the gold, frankincense, and myrrh were appropriate in their own way, but are they the only gifts? What would you have brought? So do we have the things? Kind of. You can kind of see the things. We traditionally show gold is a little casket about this big, and it's full of gold. The frankincense and myrrh are usually in larger containers, so there's a lot of it, because, riches. It's important to note that it's a lot, because that would be more. But we traditionally represent them in those ways. But what if the gold was literally like 3 pieces of gold? What if the frankincense was a little thing? The myrrh was just a little bit. We're just assuming that it was a lot because they were rich, and they were rich because they brought those things. But it's not about them, it's about who it's for. It doesn't matter how big or small your gift is. The fact that you even offer it is about what you offer it to, and that you offer it freely. And with Jesus, it doesn't require you to acknowledge a king. I feel awkward saying that. Think about it. It's my last name. It just... Some jokes die before they're told. Okay. It doesn't matter how big or how small the gift is, particularly when it comes to Jesus. I mean, the stories that we tell about Jesus later in his life, the story that we tell about this king that was worthy of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And by the way, it never says, there's no stories that say how Mary and Joseph spent that, if indeed they did. It just says they put it away. But later on, when we tell the stories of Jesus and the gifts that Jesus shares with people, some are small, some are life-changing. They're all life-changing, but some are life-changing in extraordinary ways. Lots we don't hear about. We hear about one or two in a story. There's a crowd of people around, all these disciples around. We hear about one person, being dramatically affected by Jesus. And we go, ooh, the stories about that one person being healed, receiving their sight, a miracle happened for that one person. Yowza. But think of the gift to everyone who saw that. Think of the gift to everyone who understood about receiving sight and being enlightened. Think of everyone who saw and heard and knew the wisdom of the message about loving everyone. Love your neighbor. Love your enemy. Those are gifts too. And then the sharing of that with others, yeah, it's a gift too. And that's the cool thing about the uniqueness of everybody, is that we can say one of the gifts of Jesus is that we learn to love, that we share love. But we're all uniquely different, and we share it in different ways. And sometimes that's about skills that we have, right? We have skills that we can offer to do certain things that are helpful to others. Sometimes it's about not having that skill, but trying your best to help anyway. Sometimes it's just presence, isn't it? It's just about being there. We all have gifts. And the thing about the season, Epiphany's a season, right? It's not just one Sunday. It's a series of weeks in which we traditionally hear stories of Jesus that enlighten us, reveal to us what Jesus is all about and who Jesus is. The story of the wedding in Cana, the baptism, those are the stories that we hear at this time of year because it reveals something about Jesus, which reveals something about us too, doesn't it? That's the thing. The Magi brought these three gifts, the gold, frankincense, and myrrh, to acknowledge a king. They had specific purpose to those gifts. But in offering those gifts, they didn't then I don't think they just went away and disappeared. I think they realized that moment of epiphany was, it's not about power. It's not about your place in society. It's not about having a palace or an army. It's not about being rich. It's about love. That's why that's another really good reason why it's so powerful too. Not that I'm suggesting that when children start to grow up, they're not as lovely, but that's another good reason to put them at the manger. The innocence of a newborn child. The love and wisdom of a child. I think they went away and they learned from this to share their gifts with everyone. I think they later in life probably followed Jesus. Kept track of what he was doing, learned too. In fact, I imagine every now and then the Magi were in one of those crowds, the Sermon on the Mount, even. I know what you're thinking. How can that be if that was 30 years later and these guys are old? Why do they have to be? They could have been young Magi, because wisdom is not restricted to just those of us who have white hair. The gifts that we have are gifts to offer. That's why we call them gifts. They're not just gifts to us, they're gifts to share. And over the next few weeks, we're going to hear stories of how Jesus shared the gift that is Jesus with others and revealed the different ways in which that gift impacts our life. Because that's the story of Epiphany. That's the reason we call it Epiphany, is that is revealed. So here's another revealing. Reveal your gifts. Don't be shy. Share your gifts with others. Offer to others the gift that is you. just leave it here. Take it out from here and go and offer it with others. I think that's one of the great stories about the Magi and the gifts. Is that they're not just about acknowledging Jesus as the King. It's about reminding us that we have gifts to give. We have gifts to share. And sometimes we kind of need to look at those gifts really closely to figure out what they are. But they are, in fact, us to offer. I think the Magi went away and did that. They lived into those gifts that they knew they had to offer to others. And we can too.